Have you ever wondered what role the United States plays in the Israel-Palestine conflict? It's a question that has intrigued many, especially given the recent events that have made the headlines. To understand this, we first need to cast our minds to the eastern Mediterranean region, where Israel and Palestine are situated. This region, rich in history and culture, has been the epicenter of a conflict that has spanned decades. The Israel-Palestine conflict roots date back to the early 20th century, with both Jewish and Arab national movements laying claim to the same land. Over time, this dispute has grown into a complex issue, involving politics, religion, and human rights, with the USA playing a pivotal role in its progression. Fast forward to 2021, the conflict has been marked by periods of brutal fighting, with the Israeli-Palestinian clash being among the most severe in recent years. Meanwhile, public sentiment in the United States has seen a shift, with growing support for the Palestinian cause, as reflected in rallies and polls. Yet the discourse around this issue isn't without controversy. Take for instance the case of a prominent Columbia University professor facing backlash for his comments on the conflict, which has sparked heated debates around free speech and academic freedom. Now that we've set the stage, let's delve into the history of the conflict. The roots of the conflict trace back to the late 19th and early 20th centuries. It was during this time that the Zionist movement began to gain traction. This was a political ideology centered around the belief that Jewish people deserved a homeland of their own. This ideology was primarily driven by a desire to escape the widespread persecution that Jewish individuals were subjected to throughout Europe. Simultaneously, the land of Palestine, the proposed location for this Jewish homeland, was under British control. Known as the British Mandate of Palestine, this period saw the increasing immigration of Jewish people into the region. The British government, sympathetic to the Zionist cause, issued the Balfour Declaration in 1917. This document expressed Britain's support for the establishment of a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine. However, the situation became increasingly complex, as the local Arab population viewed these immigrants as invaders of their homeland. This resulted in a growing tension between the two communities, setting the stage for future conflicts. The impact of World War II and the Holocaust further complicated the situation. The atrocities faced by Jews during the Holocaust led to an increased international support for the Zionist cause. The world, horrified by the genocide of 6 million Jews, saw the establishment of a Jewish state as a necessary refuge for survivors. Yet the Arab inhabitants of Palestine felt increasingly marginalized as their land was being promised to another people. They saw this as a continuation of colonial practices, where foreign powers dictated the fate of indigenous populations. The stage was set for a conflict that would span decades and involve numerous international players. The United States has been a key player in the Israel-Palestine conflict since its inception. Diving into the history, we find that the USA played a pivotal role in the establishment of Israel. Back in the mid-20th century, the United States was among the first nations to recognize the State of Israel, just minutes after it declared independence. This recognition was not just symbolic, it was backed by substantial financial and military support, which continues to this day. One of the most significant aspects of the USA's role has been its unwavering military aid. As a steadfast ally, the United States has provided Israel with advanced weaponry and military technology, strengthening its position in a volatile region. This aid has drawn criticism from various quarters, with some arguing that it contributes to the perpetuation of the conflict. But the USA's role is not limited to military support. Diplomatically, it has often acted as a mediator in peace talks between Israel and Palestine. From the Camp David Accords in the late 70s to the more recent Abraham Accords, the USA has been at the forefront of diplomatic efforts to resolve the conflict. However, these efforts have been met with varying degrees of success and failure. Over time, the role of the USA has evolved. While the core of its support for Israel remains intact, there are signs of shifting perspectives. We're seeing more nuanced debates about the conflict within the American political landscape. Public opinion, too, is showing an increased sensitivity towards the Palestinian cause, as evident from recent demonstrations and polls. However, it's important to note that the USA's stance on the conflict is not homogeneous. It varies across different political administrations, public opinions, and even within the academia, as evident from the recent controversies around free speech on college campuses. In conclusion, the USA's involvement in the Israel-Palestine conflict is complex and multifaceted. It's a blend of historical ties, strategic interests, and evolving public sentiment. It's a role that continues to shape the dynamics of this long-standing conflict. The conflict continues to evolve, with recent developments sparking new debates and conflicts. In recent times, the dynamics of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict have seen a shift, particularly in the United States. Traditionally, Americans have leaned towards supporting Israel, but the winds of sympathy seem to be changing direction. Demonstrations in cities like Atlanta have shown a growing support for the Palestinian cause, echoing sentiments of social unrest that have been brewing in the country. This shift is corroborated by Gallup polls, which indicate increased empathy for Palestinians. It's becoming clear that the narrative of this conflict is far from one-sided, and voices advocating for Palestinian rights are growing louder. Meanwhile, in the hallowed halls of academia, the conversation around the conflict has stirred up its own tempest. Joseph Massad, a professor at Columbia University, has come under fire for his comments on Hamas's attacks on Israel. His words, which some have interpreted as praise for acts of terror, have sparked a heated debate about the boundaries of free speech. A petition calling for his removal has gathered momentum, with over 30,000 signatures and counting. The controversy surrounding Professor Massad's comments has reignited discussions about the safety of Jewish and Israeli students on campus, and the role of educators in fostering respectful discourse. These events underscore the fact that the Israeli-Palestinian conflict isn't confined to the borders of Israel and Palestine. It reverberates across continents, influencing and being influenced by international attitudes and actions. The discourse around the conflict is continuously evolving, shaped by a myriad of voices, from demonstrators on the streets of Atlanta to professors in Ivy League classrooms. And yet, amidst these debates and developments, the stark reality of the conflict remains. Over 1,300 Israeli lives and over 2,670 Palestinian lives lost, a grim testament to the human cost of this ongoing strife. These recent developments highlight the ongoing complexity and controversy of the conflict. The Israel-Palestine conflict, with its long history and complex dynamics, continues to be a major focus of international attention. We've journeyed through its origins, explored the involvement of the United States, and delved into recent developments that have brought us to where we are today. This conflict is not simply a matter of historical interest, it's a living, breathing issue that continues to shape the lives of millions. The rise of new voices and perspectives, as shown by the growing support for the Palestinian cause in America, is indicative of a shifting landscape. Conversely, the controversy surrounding a Columbia University professor's remarks underscores the tension between free speech and promoting violence. It's a microcosm of the larger struggle, exposing the raw nerves that this conflict continues to touch. These are not easy issues to navigate, and we must tread with both knowledge and empathy. The numbers alone tell a tragic tale, with thousands of lives lost on both sides. As we continue to observe this conflict, it's important to stay informed and consider all perspectives. It's not just about taking sides, but about understanding the human stories behind the headlines, the hopes and fears, the dreams and despair. So, let's keep learning, let's keep questioning, and let's keep the dialogue open.